Is 11 a.m., so we're going to get started. My name is Janelle Robinson. I am the Wellness Coordinator and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging Committee Co-Chair here at NONOTUCK. Today we are having a supported decision-making workshop. Before we begin and introduce our presenters, I would like to ask everyone to please make sure that they stay muted throughout the presentation until the end if we have time for questions, and then also to please turn on your closed captioning for today's presentation. Rob, you can show that little example again, but you can go to the More Actions option in in Teams and click on Turn on Live Caption so that we can use that option for today's presentation. Thank you all so much for joining. One more piece I just shared, but at NONOTUCK we have a practice of dropping into the chat our name and where we're joining from. So I would like to extend that to people joining us from outside of NONOTUCK. It's really exciting to see all of you here today. And without further ado, we will begin our supported decision-making workshop.
Morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm George Fleischner. I'm the president and CEO of NONOTUCK Resource Associates. I'm really pleased to see how many people have an interest in supportive decision-making. We have three incredible presenters today, and we have first Jonathan Jenkins. I've known Jonathan for many years, and I actually forgot his last name before I did this because he's become such an icon. Everybody knows who Jonathan is, sort of like Bono and Cher and Twiggy and Flea and Divine and Nas. It's Jonathan, but it's Jonathan Jenkins. Jonathan lives in the Berkshires. He lives actually in Dalton, and he works at Guido's Market in Pittsfield. He's worked there for several years. He's a valued employee there. Jonathan is a big fan of 80s music, a huge fan of that, and he is on the SDM, Supported Decision Making Advisory Council for Center for Public Representation in regards to the pilot project that NONOTUCK did with CPR, which Bob Fleischner will be describing when we turn the camera over to him. He's created his own SDM team, which you'll find out more about. His mother, Shelley, is an incredible advocate for SDM, and he's going to kick off this workshop with a video that he created about what SDM means to him. So, Robert, could you play that, please?
One second, please.
I like supportive decision making. Our SCM team. I have my mom, my dad, my sister Sam, my Aunt Debbie, Aunt Shannon, Grandma, and my Maggie to help me pursue my goals and understand decisions. My SCM team has helped me out my job. I work at Grills Marketplace, and my SCM team helped me get extra hours. I like to work and make some money, and I need help getting more hours, and so I have my team helps me. I have worked with my club coach, Debbie. I have worked for Grills for 7 years. I love it there. Since starting the SDM product program, I have made awesome decisions in my life with my SDM team. I have traveled with my friends to many places, such as California, Las Vegas, and Florida. I was invited here at graduate school once. I helped collect donating for Special Olympics. Have a team in Bali Rock called Jonathan's Molly Crew. I decided to plan for my 8th theme party. I have Jackson friends in my life. Megan, Corey, Chris, Paige, Christine. We have fun in grade school. We together a lot. In closing, cooperative decision making is important to me because I feel I can make my own decisions and get help from my team to reach my goals. It has changed my life.
It's gonna be all over the net.
Oh, God.
You okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So who's on your team?
My sister, my Aunt Debbie, Grandma, Maggie, and my mom and my dad. Oh, my nephew. I'm an uncle now.
You're an uncle now.
Yeah.
That is so exciting. Congratulations,
Yeah.
Uncle Jonathan.
Thanks.
All right, so just say it.
I love rock and roll.
Thank you, Jonathan. I love the air guitar. Thank you very much, Jonathan. That was awesome. Next up, we have Carrie Bona. Carrie also lives in the Berkshires, and she works at Goodwill. She's the daughter of our longtime past president or past chair of the board of directors at NONOTUCK, Fred Bona. Fred passed away about a year ago, and it was Fred's wish with Carrie to Fred was the guardian of Carrie, to not have Carrie go under guardianship, but to move Carrie into supportive decision making. Interestingly enough, Fred, an amazing man and a friend, had talked to me about he and his wife getting guardianship for Carrie way back in the day, and they felt as though there was nothing in between that might help Carrie make decisions, but while also protecting her from services and et cetera. So SDM has been a great help in finding sort of a middle ground between that could help people with disabilities with support decision making. So Gary has put something together for us today about her support of SDM. Gary?
Hello, my name is Carrie Bona. I am happy to talk to you all a little bit about my experience with supportive decision making. I am not able to speak as a result of my cerebral palsy. I use eye gaze and gestures to communicate quickly, and very well with people who know me. When I was a young adult, I was so frustrated with people not understanding me or misinterpreting me that I asked my parents to become my guardians. I didn't realize how much this could change my ability to make decisions for myself. I am happy and grateful. My parents were great advocates and really supported my decision making. They really helped my decisions be heard by others. I also have many good friends and family members who help me the way many of your friends and family help you make decisions. I never realized that guardianship was not supportive decision making until we attended the first conference with NONOTUCK about it. That was years ago. It got us thinking maybe I didn't need a guardian. Now that my parents have passed away, I want to keep making decisions the way I did with their help. I need people who support me to make my own decisions, not someone who can make a decision for me. I don't want another guardian. I realize I don't need one. I will keep using my friends and family and NONOTUCK team to help me get the information I need to make decisions and to help me make sure others understand my wishes and decisions. Now they are no longer here to be my guardians, and I am more confident in supportive decision making. I am surrounded by people who care and support me, and I can make use of a communication device that allows me to speak clearly to others. Technology gets better and better, and so do my relationships with people I love and trust. I hope supported decision making is something everyone gets to know more about.
Thank you, Carrie. Before I introduce Bob Fleischner, we're gonna zoom back to Jonathan and Maggie. I forgot that Jonathan also had a live speech that he wanted to share with us. Jonathan?
This was his speech from the Massachusetts State House that he presented in regards to the bill and trying to get the bill passed. So here you go, Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I like supportive decision making. I have my family and my closest friend help me my understand decisions. Help me be on my interests on my STEM team. I have my mother, my father, my sister Sam, my Debbie, Shannon, Grandma, and Mother Maggie. I have been NONOTUCK for 13 years. When I need help with my decisions, I usually look to my parents for support. After I also speak to my other team members when they are visiting. My STEM team helps me out at my job. I work at Grills Marketplace, and my STEM team get active hours. I like to work and make some money, and I need help getting more hours. As I have my team helps me. My friends at Grills take care of me at work. I work with my job coach, Shannon. I have worked for Grills for 13 years. I love it there. My SEM team helps me grow in my skills, such as my baking and making health decisions at doctors and dentist appointments, and buying healthy food choices. My SEM team is very important to me. And I trust them. Since starting the SEM program, I have made a number of decisions in my life. With my SEM team, I have saved money and purchased smart TV. And I have window fan in my room. I have traveled with my friends to many places, such as California, Tennessee, Las Vegas, Grand Canyon, and Florida. I enjoy going on vacations. Because I get to see my favorite friends, like my friend Beethoven and his family in Florida. and causing supportive decision making is important to me because I feel I can make my own decisions and I can help for my team to reach my goals. I am thankful for CPR, NONOTUCK, my favorite best friends, Maggie and George Buckner, for the SEM pilot program. It has changed my life. I'm excited to be the newest leader in SEM.
That's great, Jonathan. The message below said my last name was Buckner instead of Fleischner. I thought so funny. Anyway, thanks very much. I'm going to introduce my brother, Bob Fleischner, who has worked for legal services, worked for legal services during the 70s. He's a Vietnam vet. He joined the Center for Public Representation in the late 70s and helped close the Northampton State Hospital, and it became early on sort of the Massachusetts expert on guardianship. He wrote the book on guardianship for Massachusetts. So he knows he was very instrumental in the development of in supportive decision making in Massachusetts. He's worked worldwide on the issue and was the driver behind the pilot that NONOTUCK collaborated with CPR in Western Massachusetts. So it's all yours, Bob.
Thank you, George. And hello to everybody. I'm going to use a PowerPoint that Robert is going to put up, and I'm going to have to ask him throughout this to move to the next slide as that's appropriate. Robert, move to the next slide, please. Okay. There has been an international movement across the world over the last 10 or 15 years to try to find alternatives to placing people under guardianship. It's really important to understand that having a guardian is a situation which places the person who's under guardianship, and in Massachusetts that's called by the unfortunate name of an incapacitated person, is the legal term for it. So when a person is determined to be an incapacitated person, they can have a guardian appointed for them, and the guardian, unless the court order says so, has unlimited authority over the person's life, with a few exceptions. And about 25 years ago, states, including Massachusetts, began to move toward limiting guardianship so that guardians had not complete what's called plenary power, but had power just over the parts of a person's life where the person was unable to make their own decisions. You probably know, if you follow the news, and if you follow the news since the 1980s, that although most guardians act responsibly and in the best interests of the person for whom they're guardian, there's been a lot of abuse of guardianship. And the most recent example of this has been the very public fight that the popular singer Britney Spears had with her father in California. Her father was her guardian. In California, guardian's called a conservator. He was her conservator, and he put extraordinary limitations on Britney Spears' life. So there's been a lot of interest in the community of people with disabilities and their advocates and families in trying to find alternatives to guardianship. And perhaps the most important expression of this is something called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which is the CRPD, so-called. The CRPD was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in the early 1990s, and more than 170 nations have ratified it. That means that they have said that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is part of their law. The United States is one of only a handful of countries in the world that has not ratified the convention. President Barack Obama signed it, but in order to become a treaty recognized by the United States, it has to be ratified by the United States Senate, and the Senate, in a close vote, failed to do that. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to ratify a treaty, and it failed. So, although the United States is not bound by the requirements of the CRPD, most of the nations of the world are. One of the most, and despite that, the CRPD has an important role in the United States because it provides courts and individuals and citizens with a sense of where the world is headed on thinking about guardianship and capacity. Article 12 of the convention is the most important article in terms of guardianship. And it says that all people with disabilities have what the CRPD calls legal capacity that's equal to that of all persons without disabilities. It recognizes that people with disabilities can make their own choices and decisions consistent with their will and preferences. And it requires that governments provide appropriate supports and services to enable the individual with a disability to be able to exercise their legal capacity and to make their decisions to the fullest extent possible. One of the ways that the CRPD has urged and requires nations to implement Article 12 is through providing programs of supported decision-making. And I'll describe what supported decision-making is in a few minutes. You've heard about it from Jonathan and Carrie, but I'll tell you a little bit more about how the process works. There is a large international movement on supported decision-making, and it's been implemented in a wide variety of countries around the world. Perhaps the first supported decision-making processes that even predated the CRPD were in Canada, in British Columbia, and to a lesser extent in Ontario. But Australia, Ireland, Israel, Sweden, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Peru are among the countries that have adopted supported decision-making and have added supported decision-making to their national statutes and to the statutes of the various political divisions in their countries. Some of these countries have not only adopted supported decision-making, but have moved toward the abolition of guardianship entirely. The Supreme Court of Mexico has found that guardianship violates the CRPD and the Mexican Constitution. So there is a movement in Mexico toward abolishing guardianship. Bulgaria has nearly abolished guardianship. Ireland is moving in that direction. And Peru has probably done the most in terms of implementing the CRPD's Article 12. And it has a national statute now saying that all persons have legal capacity in Peru. So the next slide, please, Robert. So here's what supported decision-making is about. And this is the important distinction between supported decision-making and guardianship or other kinds of substitute, other kinds of mechanisms in which a person loses their decision-making authority and someone else takes it over for them. Guardianship's not the only one. But in supported decision-making, the idea is that individuals with disabilities make their choices about their own lives with support from a team of people who they choose. And you heard Jonathan describe his supported decision-making team. Individuals who are practicing and using supported decision-making identify areas where they feel that they need decision-making assistance. And usually those areas are things like healthcare, employment, relationships, finances, and they identify the types of supports that they would like to use to make decisions about that. They select the people who will provide them assistance, and those people are called supporters. And the supporters commit to providing information and advice and assistance to individuals so the individuals can make their own decisions. The supporters agree that they're not going to make the decisions for the person, unlike a guardian or even like a representative payee or a conservator, but that they will honor the individual's decisions. They will help the individual make those decisions and will provide them with the information and advice when they're asked. But they recognize and they commit to honoring the person's decisions, person's own decisions, and not to making decisions for them. The individuals and supporters then come together and execute what's called a supported decision-making agreement. Jonathan has one. And in that supported decision-making agreement, they go through the things that I've just talked about. The agreement talks about who is going to be the supporter for healthcare decisions or employment decisions or relationships. And they may be different people for different areas of decision-making. For instance, we've assisted people to execute supported decision-making agreements in which they may turn to their parents for help for decisions on healthcare, but may not want their parents involved in decisions about their relationships. So it varies from person to person, and each supported decision-making agreement is individualized and is different from person to person. Some people, like Carrie, practice supported decision-making without a written agreement, and that's entirely appropriate. All of us, one of the things that we tell supporters and the people that we're working with in writing SDMAs, as we call the agreement, is that this is how everyone on this call makes decisions that are difficult in their lives. We turn to our friends and our partners and our and professionals to help us make decisions about important things in our lives. And that's all that supported decision-making does, is it in some ways formalizes the decision-making process that we all use. So the next slide. After the CRPD was enacted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and as we began looking around the world at supported decision-making projects, supported decision-making as it was progressing in other countries, particularly in Canada. I was then working at the Center for Public Representation, which is a public interest law firm with its main offices in East Hampton, Massachusetts. And we got together because we had natural relationships and familial relationships with NONOTUCK, and because NONOTUCK was a perfect place and the perfect group to partner with on this, to develop what really is the first supported decision-making pilot project in the United States. About a dozen people who were affiliated with NONOTUCK created supported decision-making networks to help them reach their own decisions in the kinds of matters that I discussed a few minutes ago. This was a long process. In fact, I think that one of the things that surprised us the most about the process was how intensive it was, because it started with people like Maggie or Angela, who you've seen with Jonathan and Carrie, talking to people about the possibility of supported decision-making, seeing if they were interested. And if they were, then we had a team of people from CPR and NONOTUCK who met with them to describe the process, to go through how they make decisions, to talk with them about what decisions are important in their lives, to talk to them about who the people are that they turn to for support. Then we got together with the supporters and the person who was going to be the decision maker. And we talked about how the process would work. And then over time, we developed the agreement. We had the agreement notarized. It's not, I'll tell you more about this in a minute, but it's not a legal paper in Massachusetts. It's really more of a contract between individuals. But we had the document notarized to make it more official. And we had the pilot project evaluated by an outside agency. This project went on for about 3 years, and it was evaluated by an outside group that does human services evaluation. And the evaluation was extraordinarily favorable. It's a small group to work with, so the statistical representations out of it don't have much meaning since we're dealing with only about a dozen people. But the evaluation was the first evaluation of any supported decision-making project in the US. It's been widely referenced in legal and human services literature, and the project's been widely acclaimed. The pilot project's been widely acclaimed. So next slide, please, Robert. I've described already the agreement process. First is the indication of an interest, then we meet with people to explain the idea, and then finally an SDM agreement is drafted and signed. So next slide. This is a picture of Corey. And actually, when this picture was taken, he just signed a supported decision-making agreement. Corey made history in Massachusetts. On November 17th in 2015, Corey and his family and supporters went before the Berkshire County Probate Court, and we successfully petitioned to terminate Corey's guardianship. Corey had been under guardianship since he turned 18. His family felt at that time two things. One, that he needed a lot of assistance, and secondly, that there was no alternative to Corey for Corey to guardianship. But as Corey aged, and through help from NONOTUCK and his parents and his family came to believe that he no longer needed a guardian, although he needed help in making decisions in some parts of his life. So we went through the process that I just described with Corey. We wrote up a supported decision-making agreement. We also had Corey sign a healthcare proxy, which is a document which appoints an individual to make decisions for him in healthcare decisions if he's incapable of making those decisions for himself. And we added in the healthcare proxy that he was incapable of making those decisions, even with the help of a supported decision-making team. We filed a petition in the Berkshire County Probate Court to terminate the guardianship. The Department of Developmental Services, DDS, appeared in the case. They have to, under the Massachusetts statute, they have to be given notice. And we also had a clinical team report done. We had to work with the members of the clinical team to explain what the supported decision-making process was and how it worked with Corey. Each of the members of the CRT team said that with support, Corey was able to make decisions and didn't need a guardian. You may know that a clinical team report has to be filed when a person is being placed under guardianship, and we felt it was best to file one when we were moving to terminate Corey's guardianship. The judge in the probate court asked appropriate questions, and after asking those questions, he found that Corey no longer needed a guardian, and the guardianship was terminated. Corey's the first person. He made history because he's the first person in Massachusetts to have a guardianship terminated because of the existence of a supported decision-making agreement. But we think that Corey will not be the last. Next slide. One of the things that the evaluators did when they evaluated the CPR NONOTUCK pilot project was to talk to people who had adopted supported decision-making instead of guardianship, or who had just adopted it because they thought it formalized a way that they wanted to have help in making decisions. And these are some of the things that people said. They were overwhelmingly favorable to it. One person said it helps people with disabilities have their independence, even though they have to have support through it all. It feels so much better because my parents aren't so in charge of me anymore, another person said. I have some independence now. Another person said it feels good, life is better. People explain things to me. I have people I trust and like. Another said I have a new leaf on a family tree. And another said it helps people with their problems. I help my coworkers. I feel more confident and stronger. The supporters said the same thing. Corey's mother, who had been his co-guardian and then his guardian, and who supported and is now one of his supporters, said that it helped Corey become the person she knew he always could be. And very, very moving testimony and statements from people who've used supported decision making as a way to either avoid guardianship or to be terminated for guardianship, or just to make their lives better in terms of being able to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. So next slide. Can you go back? There we go. There you go. For some people with disabilities, making decisions will be there on their own will be a new experience. And we'll wait for the slide to go. Here we go. For some people with disabilities, making decisions on their own will be a new experience for them. I think everyone on this call knows that lots of people, particularly people who've been institutionalized or who've been in programs all of their lives, or who've had even well-meaning families who have not made their own decisions, and they've never had either the experience of making their own decisions or received the kinds of support and training that help them learn to make their own decisions. So for some, it'll be a new experience. In some of these cases, other people have been making decisions for them for years and even for all their lives. Others who come into supported decision-making have made decisions with support, and what a supported decision-making agreement does for them is really formalize, in a way, a process that they are used to. Even some guardians use supported decision-making like processes for people for whom they're guardians. And that's a very good thing, and that's supported by even by people who support guardianship associations and groups. Care staff, families, and friends can help people learn how to exercise choice and express their will and preferences. One of the things that's interesting that's come out of supported decision-making advocacy in the United States and around the world is that that educators are developing curriculums that start even as early as kindergarten for children with disabilities, to help them learn a decision-making process. And there's a pedagogy growing up in the United States and, as I said, around the world, to bring decision-making and decision-making skills into educational programs for people with disabilities and people without disabilities. It's an important skill for everyone. So next slide, please. One of the things that's happened in the United States and is in the process, we hope, of happening in Massachusetts is that supported decision-making agreements have been afforded legal recognition in the law of 14 or 15 states now. What's important about having a supported decision-making law is that it institutionalizes and gives legal recognition to the agreement. And one of the most important parts of that is that it's often difficult. One of the biggest problems that people with disabilities make in making decisions for themselves is having those decisions recognized by third parties. And by third parties, in this sense, I mean particularly places like banks, healthcare organizations and healthcare providers, landlords, financial institutions of other kinds, other support providers, so that many people with disabilities have experienced, I think, the going to a doctor or going to a bank and having things explained to them and saying, this is what I want, and then having the provider say, well, I'd like to do that for you, but I don't think you're capable of making that decision, and I can't either do the operation or provide the prescription or give you the money or let you sign the lease unless you have a guardian. What a supported decision-making law does is it provides that if a person has made a decision pursuant to supported decision-making, that decision should be followed by third parties. And it indemnifies, that is, it protects the third party when the third party acts upon the decision that the person has made. So for instance, an example I just used, if a doctor says, if a doctor agrees to provide a prescription for someone pursuant to a consent provided through a supported decision-making agreement, the doctor's protected from a lawsuit later in which someone says you provided that prescription without informed consent. That's an important protection. That doesn't exist in Massachusetts because we don't have that built into the bill. We don't have a law in Massachusetts. We do have a bill. Now, this is a supported decision-making bill, which is supported by NONOTUCK and supported by advocates at NONOTUCK and people who are participants in the NONOTUCK program, and by many other organizations, including Massachusetts ARC, the DD Council, the Guardianship Policy Institute, the Massachusetts Guardianship Association, the Disability Law Center, the Center for Public Representation, the Committee for Public Counsel Services, and so on. The bill this year passed the Senate in 2022, but never got out from the Massachusetts House Ways and Means Committee before the session ended last week. So the bill will be refiled later this month, and we hope that the bill will move more quickly. It's a 2-year legislative session in Massachusetts, as you may know. We hope it won't take 2 years to get it through, and we hope that it won't die in the last days of the session. So we will appreciate, we'll be looking for support. Many of you provided that kind of support, calls to legislators. We had tremendous legislative support, including from legislators in the western part of the state, but throughout the state. The primary sponsors were Representative Tucker, who's now district attorney in Essex, and Senator Lovely, who's also from the northern part of Massachusetts. And Senator Lovely will be back, and we have new sponsors already lined up in the House. So we hope to have a state law here. There are laws recognizing supported decision-making in Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and New York. So we're surrounded by states that recognize supported decision-making. So the last slide, please, or next to last slide. Just want to mention briefly that there are ways that a person can delegate decision-making authority. Healthcare proxy I've talked about. There are delegations that adults over 18 can use if they're still receiving special education services in high schools. And there are other ways to delegate, other ways for a person to retain some or all decision-making authority, but to pass it on to others in certain situations. So the final slide, please. This is a slide with that comes from something from the Center for Public Representation, but it's one that I love. And it is a quote from Judge Gail Perlman, who's now retired, who was the first justice of the Hampshire County Probate Court in Northampton. And she was one of the members of the original advisory council that advised CPR and NONOTUCK on the pilot project. She was a great help to us. She was a terrific judge. And she said, the minute a person becomes a person, everything changes. And that's what supported decision-making does. It takes guardianship, for all the good that it may do, takes a person, it makes a person no longer a legal person. All of the person's legal rights, or most of them, are transferred to a guardian. Supported decision-making avoids that, and the person becomes a person in a legal sense again. And their legal capacity is recognized, and their ability to make their own decisions is recognized. And it is both an important civil rights protection, it's a human rights protection, and it's a personal achievement for people to be able to make their own decisions. And I think you've heard from Jonathan, and you can hear from Corey. If you go to the NONOTUCK or the CPR websites, you can see statements from Corey. And you've heard today from Carrie about what it means to be able to make the important decisions in your own life for yourself. And that's what that's the promise of supported decision-making. And I think it's the future of decision-making for many, many, many people with disabilities and for elders, for that matter, in the United States and around the world. So I'll end my presentation with that and turn it back to George and Janelle. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Kind of a big crowd for that, but we'll see how they want to do that.
Thank you so much, Bob. Yes, we do have time for some questions. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, but if you do have a question and you would like to raise your hand, there is a hand raise feature. You can also type them into the chat, and maybe Rob and I can both keep an eye on the chat for those questions. So if anybody has any questions, the floor is open. I see a hand raised, Charles Mills. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you'd like.
Okay. My question is for the supported decision-making team, is there a limit on how many people that could be on the team?
The answer to that is no.
Okay.
There's, at least in the pilot project, we placed no limitations on that. And we had as few as 2. And as many as 10. Jonathan's got a bunch, and several other participants wanted a number of to have a number of supporters, in part because they wanted some for one reason and some for another reason, and in part because they just had a lot of friends and family who they like to turn to for help. And the way the process works, the person who writes the agreement is called the decision maker, kind of an awkward term, but it's descriptive. The decision maker doesn't have to turn to all 10 people. Jonathan doesn't have to consult with everybody that's a supporter. He can consult with whomever he wants or nobody when he makes a decision. But there is no number. It helps, we think, to have more than one. For lots of reasons, including that the more people are involved, the more there's both an opportunity for the exchange of ideas, and there is one of the fears that many people have about supported decision making is that people will be manipulated and abused in the process. And the more supporters you have, the less chance there is for that. We don't think, there's no evidence of that happening with anyone we've ever worked with, but that's one of the objections to supported decision making. That objection also ignores the fact that there's usually only one guardian and almost no oversight of what the guardian's doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question, Charles.
Jill, I see your hand is raised. You want to unmute yourself and you can turn your camera on.
There's our camera. We must have been, we've had the camera on the entire time, but Tammy did have a question, so go ahead, Tammy.
I'm just curious about folks in group homes. Are there any people in group homes that are under SDM? Or are you finding resistance for that in group homes?
There's no reason someone in a group home could not be under a supported decision-making agreement. In fact, there's every reason why they should be, or could be. And none of the people in the pilot project were in group homes because that's not the NONOTUCK residential delivery model. It's a shared living model. So none of the people that we worked with in the pilot were in group homes. There has been one of the objections that we've heard, or one of the questions that's been raised by some people about it, has related to group homes. And there has been the question was whether, if the person selected group home staff as their supporters, whether that would lead to problems and the possibility of manipulation and abuse in the group home. Some states, a couple of states that have statutes, have say that a person who provides services to the decision maker cannot be a supporter. We think that's not the experience in Massachusetts. That's not true in the way that we've done it. That's not in our statute. And we think that, although we understand that there's a possibility of manipulation or abuse there, we think that if the staff person is the person who's the closest and knows the person best, and the person selects them, they're a logical person to be a supporter. But we have, when that's happened, when we've done them, we've discussed with the staff person the possibility of conflicts of interest, and that they should not be involved in decisions that would conflict with their work responsibilities. Roberta?
Yeah, I guess my question is, where would I go for some information to bring to the caregivers? Because I have several people that are presumed competent, and I'm constantly going out talking about healthcare proxies and trying to get them to fill out forms, and they probably would do very well with this, but to like present them with the information and discuss it, I'm not as thorough as you are because it's, fairly new to me. So where would be the best place for me to get some information to bring out to caregivers to get them thinking in this way?
There's information on NONOTUCK's website.
Okay.
There's information on a website called Supported Decisions, one word, .org. That's a website that's maintained by the Center for Public Representation. And there is another website called supporteddecisionmaking.org, which is maintained by the National Center on Supported Decision Making, which is in Washington, D.C. Those are the three best. The NONOTUCK is local. The CPR site, Supported Decisions, is more national, and the supporteddecisionmaking.org is also national. But there's a lot of information on all three of those websites.
Wonderful, because my big concern is when people become of age and their families can't get their health information from them. Like a lot of times there's no issues, but I've hit a couple of doctors, being a nurse for 40 years, that they're just adamant about getting a piece of paper signed or some information before they tell anyone else because of their age.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of elder advocacy groups also, although many elders also have disabilities, that elder advocacy groups are also interested in supported decision making. And there is the federal government supports supported decision making through the Agency on Community Living, which is the agency that that's responsible for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities and aging. So the federal government sees this as across both aging and disabilities.
Thank you.
Looks like some of those links were also added to the chat, so you can keep your eye out for those, and we can always follow up with an email as well. I think,
You know, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
George. Bob, we often, get referrals or people or families asking about who they may contact for SDM for their loved one. And as I found throughout the years, there's very few lawyers. And after going through the pilot with CPR and you, it really worked hand in hand. The staff and NONOTUCK knowing who the person was, and CPR knowing what sort of the legality it was. And I don't think that, we couldn't have done it without sort of, having you to sort of explain to the family and to the person, the decision maker, what it was all about. Are lawyers across the state getting sort of trained and getting up on this stuff? Are there law offices that people can contact to support people on this? Because it's been really hard to find people.
Yeah, well, it's been hard to find people because the answer to your first questions are mostly no. There are a few lawyers who do who do primarily estate planning work for people with disabilities who know about supported decision making and who advise their clients about it. So, for instance, if you were setting up a special needs trust or something like that, these lawyers specialize in that kind of estate planning. So they're doing that. There has been training on supported decision making for all of the lawyers at the Committee for Public Counsel Services who are on the guardianship list. That means they're the lawyers who are appointed to represent people in guardianship cases, in which person's entitled to a lawyer, which is not most of them. So all of the defense lawyer, the guardianship defense bar knows about this, but that doesn't get to the proactive piece. There has been the elder bar, lawyers who provide services to elders are generally aware of this. Whether they recommend it or not, I don't know. They're definitely, I think our hope is that if the bill passes and becomes law, then it'll be something that is of more interest to lawyers. Let me also say that keeping lawyers out of this is not a bad thing. Let me give you an example of healthcare proxies. You can write a healthcare proxy on a one-page form by yourself. If you go to a lawyer, you're going to sign a 10-page form that's going to take the lawyer hours to write. And what we don't want, supported decision-making should be an organic process. And it's one in which over-involvement from lawyers would not be a useful thing. But lawyers should be aware of it, and there need to be more resources available to guide people through this. And there needs to be legal advice, particularly if the statute passes. So I think the challenge will be to get lawyers knowledgeable, get them involved, and keep them from being too involved, which is usually true about just about everything.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, everybody. It's noon, so we're going to close, but I just want to share we had over 100 people here today. So clearly there is great interest in this subject. It might mean we need to do a part 2 if you did not get your question answered. Thank you so much to Bob, Jonathan, Carrie, and everybody that helped make today possible. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.